Okay, good evening, good afternoon, good morning. It's the evening here in the UK. It's a Saturday night of all things, and it's the PhocusWire PundIT Show. It's number 11, and the reason why we're recording it on a Saturday night, Saturday afternoon for where my guests are in North America, is that we thought it would be useful to convene not an emergency podcast, but a special edition podcast based on some of the rather interesting shenanigans of the last few days. We've had 48 hours since the first kind of a bombshell, and then 24 hours on from that for the second one. Maybe bombshell is maybe overcooking it, but that's what we'll get round to with our guests shortly. I'm talking obviously about what some are labelling, one of them, which is our guest, is a tectonic shift in what's happening in the tours and activities sector. First of all, Thursday morning, Booking Holdings buys FareHarbor. FareHarbor, a company that's been around for 3 or 4 years, has raised almost no money whatsoever. It's now part of Booking Holdings, which is for everyone else's benefit, is Booking.com. 24 hours later, just as we're about to publish a big analysis piece on what that means, TripAdvisor announces that it's bought Boken, the Icelandic tech company. Both of which, we must point out, were for undisclosed fees. Read into that what you will, but either way, there was within the space of 24 hours, 36 hours, most of the people then in tours and activities space were either scratching their heads or smiling, smirking to themselves almost, and saying this is what it's all about. We've hit something. Maybe that something to hit is something tectonic. So our emergency podcast then features 2 guests. You wouldn't believe how much I appreciate them coming on the show this afternoon. There's Stephen Joyce. He returns. He was on one of these just a couple of weeks ago. So Stephen Joyce, Rezgo in Vancouver. Good afternoon, Stephen. How are you?
I'm very well.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And joining him is another dare I say, a voice of the tours and activities sector, but he is a specialist, formerly with FlexTrip, and now he is with Redeam. Alex is in Colorado. Alex, good afternoon to you as well, sir.
Good afternoon. Great to be here.
Right. So, as I said, it's been a rather interesting 48 hours. I'm going to ask you first, Alex. I mean, you were the one who tweeted about tectonic plates and things, big shift and stuff like that. Why did you tweet that? Were you just over-egging it a little bit?
Well, no. I mean, I think there's 2 big events that happened. Let's talk about the FareHarbor acquisition first. I mean, the one is that we finally see Booking Holdings, Priceline, formerly Priceline, entering the space in a significant manner, right? I think they've been sitting on the sidelines in the market for a very long time, and there was for a very long time question whether they would ever really come and look at this sector seriously. And arguably by buying certainly one of the most successful reservation systems out there in the space, I think they certainly made a big splash. So I think for on the one hand, that was a big deal on its own. The second one, which is an event that really hasn't occurred at this scale in our sector, is that a distributor, right, traditionally an OTA, has bought a reservation system. And I think, I'm not going to speak for all of them. I'm not in that space. We'll hear from Stephen here in a second, but I think that's kind of an event a lot of these reservation systems have been waiting for. And it's, finally happened. So I think from that perspective, it certainly represents some tectonic shifts in the sector.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'm a journalist, and we love weeks like these, obviously, because it gives us a lot of stuff to write about. I don't recall one, Stephen, in your particular sector that has caught the attention perhaps since Viator was bought by TripAdvisor. Would you agree, or was that just a one-off deal? Yes, it was significant, and this is probably perhaps the biggest week in your sector, almost in its history.
Yeah, certainly since the Viator acquisition and the fairly large raises by Get Your Guide and by Klook, and then some of the smaller, certainly those were the big sort of things that have happened in the space. But on the And for all of those have generally been on the B2C side. So we haven't seen anything on the plumbing end of the business, right? So on the reservation side, on the supply side of the market, there's been very little, if any, significant investment or attention paid to the companies on that side of it. So
why would you say that is, Steve?
I think partly because it's not sexy. It's not the stuff that people see, and I think companies were kind of looking for a standout, someone that, a company that could actually show some scale in the space. Given the size of the market, I think the reason why Fair Harbor drew that kind of attention is because they were able, in a very short amount of time, they were able to do what the rest of us arguably weren't able to do, and that was to scale very, very quickly in a very short amount of time, and do it with a business model that none of us were, had sort of twigged on. So I think they were very smart in what they did. They used a business model that I would still argue for the long term is not the best model, but in the short term certainly has gotten them the kind of traction that they need in order to draw the kind of attention that they need to do a deal like this.
Yeah, just on that. Sorry, Steve, to interrupt. I mean, just for the uninitiated and the sometimes stupid, which is me, what is it that's in inverted commas unique or different about their business model, which is obviously perhaps caught the attention of Mr. Fogel and his M&A comrades at Booking Holdings?
Yeah, well, their business model is not unique in that the way that they generate revenue is by charging the end consumer a booking fee when that consumer purchases a ticket from one of their supply customers. So the suppliers that use the Fair Harbor platform, when the end consumer purchases a ticket from them, they get charged a 6% booking fee at the time that they make the booking. Now, that's not in and of itself a unique ticketing or revenue generating proposition. We see a lot of ticketing platforms do that. Ticketmaster, for example, charges their convenience fee. Several other systems like Zozy and Peak and Zerv all charged a similar fee. But Fair Harbor, for some reason, was able to scale with it and get the kind of traction with that business model that the others were not able to do. So, prior to them, that model wasn't really seen as a particularly successful one. They've kind of turned that on its head. So, congratulations to them for being able to do that. It's amazing that they've been able to scale that to that degree.
And I think a lot of credit for that goes to the sales approach that Fair Harbor had. Max Valverde and his team over there. I mean, I'll say this: I consider them sales animals. I mean, they really were a very different breed, and one that I think in this sector just it hadn't seen before. And their outbound calling force that they had. I mean, I've been in their offices several times. You just see banks of people just calling, and it's really amazing to watch.
Now, on that, Alex, though, they've raised hardly any money at all, so they were doing this off of their own fumes.
Which is
raising, I think Peak has raised 16.9, Rezdy 9.6, which the two of the brands that are considered to be, I guess, closest to Fair Harbor in some respects. Correct me if I'm wrong, but those are significant sums of money compared to the six figures. That's not million, that's hundreds of thousands that Fair Harbor has raised.
Yeah, and I think again that's a testament to the whole team there. From Lawrence, the CEO, all the way down. They've just been focused on execution, and they, don't get me wrong, they didn't have success from day one, right? They struggled for a while as well, just like any small business does. But like Stephen mentioned, they found a business model that they could scale rapidly. And personally, I am really amazed at how little money they raised versus, we saw reports of them doing maybe 50 million in revenue. That's really amazing to scale to that level without raising a significant amount of money. it shows a lot of entrepreneurs, in the space that it is possible to build a fairly sizable business in travel without going for the big bucks, without raising a ton of venture capital.
And end up in the hands of a company that's generally well respected in the industry in the shape of Booking Holdings.
Yeah, I mean, and their motto was do whatever it blank takes. That was their corporate motto, and clearly they found their way to success. So all hats off to them.
Yeah, Stephen, why do you? This has been something that us three and many others in your comrades elsewhere in tourism activities have talked about for a long time, and that is, Booking Holdings and Booking.com and formerly Priceline Group has sat on the sidelines and just watched all this unfold for a long time, and it decided to jump. So two questions really: why did it decide to sit on the sidelines for so long, and what is it that has suddenly made them go, all right, then let's do it. We've made a strategic decision that this is a sector that we are now going to try and brackets inevitably dominate. So what's been going on in Fogel's head for however long?
Oh, I would not want to speculate what's been going Fogel's head, but from an outside perspective, to me it looks like what Booking.com is, Booking Holdings, Priceline in general, has done is they've stayed away from tourism activities because there just hasn't been enough scale, and there hasn't been a market leader. There's been a lot of leaders. There's been a lot of companies that, like ours and like Rezdy and Peak and Fair Harbor before this, and before this acquisition, and all the other ones that were doing well in the space, but there was no one company that kind of stood out as the market leader. And what they were waiting for is they were waiting for that market leader to appear, to be clearly the market leader in terms of scale and in terms of supplier acquisition and the number of suppliers on the platform. And then be able to say, okay, that's the market leader, that's the one that we'll acquire, and then go from there. Instead of having to do a roll up of like 20 different small companies and deal with the pain of having to merge those companies together, they just go for the number one. So they went with the number one draft pick, which in this case was Fair Harbor.
Okay, Alex, any view on that? I mean, is it radically different from what Stephen said, that they were just waiting for a market leader or someone that they considered to be the best company to buy, and that's why they waited?
Yeah, I mean, I think, that's certainly true. I mean, there's no question there. I think the other facet here that's maybe less quantifiable is there's just been this energy in the market, especially over the past year, right? There's been a lot of things happening. Certainly, think about connectivity. I mean, if we look at what's happened in the past year in terms of connectivity and the space getting wired up, there's been a lot more rapid movement than there has been in, I've been in the sector now for 7 years, in that whole previous 6 years combined. I think there's just been a lot more going on. And I think you start sensing that even, at those top levels, and you kind of see, okay, this market is now at an inflection point where there's a lot more supply coming online, and a lot more technology serving the suppliers. And I think over the long run, I think the Booking.com strategy that was so successful with especially small and independent properties, it's got to be their playbook, or at least very similar for this market as well. Right? Just suck up as much supply as you can and build this massive marketplace that then sucks in a lot more consumers, because that's where most of the supply is. I mean, I think that playbook is going to repeat itself here in tourism activities.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come to that in a minute. But I mean, interesting what you're saying. There has been this kind of momentum almost in the sector as a whole for the last year. I mean, I don't want to blow smoke up your backside, but I mean, Redeem did pretty well back at the PhocusWire conference in November 2017. You won a trio of awards, and I mean, I think the point about that is that was. It wasn't shocking, because I'm sure you deserve to win, but you know what I mean? It was like a coming of age almost, to time very nicely with PhocusWire's report on it. But it seemed as if there's a lot of people been waking up and smelling the coffee for the last year, and that was signified 6 months ago by you winning a Trove Awards and all these deals. There's just been this kind of hubbub of activity almost.
Yep, I agree. I mean, I as much as I think Leith especially did a great job presenting for us. I think it, and I said this at the time. I think we did a pundit show right after
you did,
the awards. I really took it as a more of an award for the market as well, right? Like obviously great for us, but it really signified that tours and activities is finally getting some recognition. There is stuff going on in this sector that's worthwhile paying attention to, even at the very highest levels. And clearly we saw with the move on Thursday, they finally are.
Now, so, I mean, Stephen, sorry, I was gasping some tea then, just as you stopped. Sorry, apologies. But, Stephen, I mean, you've been doing this for as long as I've known you. So, you've been watching this, and for fear of making you sound old, because you're quite clearly not, but you know what I mean? You've been around doing this for a while, and you've seen this market evolve. What would you say has been, Alex here talked about connectivity over the last year. What other things have been happening that has been maybe inspiring the likes of Booking Holdings, not just to buy that particular deal, but just the general market about why they're all waking up?
Well, if we could go back to 2011 and my discussions with Douglas Quimby about, actually before that, it was like 2008 when I first approached him and I said, you guys need to do some research into the tour and activity space because I'm pretty sure it's a lot bigger than everybody thinks it is. I would probably not have that conversation with him. Yeah. Only because, it's happened over time, and what we've seen is a gradual opening of the opening of that door into Narnia, essentially, right? Where we've entered into this place that we can no longer come back from, and it's mainly been a gradual discovery that this is a space where the market, it's a greenfield market. There's not a lot of tech players, not a lot of investment. People are hungry for technology. They're hungry for solutions. And it's much, much bigger than everybody thought it was. And it was after that first research report that Focusrite did in 2011, we saw a slew of new entrants into the marketplace. After the one in 2012, I think, or 2014, the European one, we saw another slew, and after the last one seemed to be the one that was kind of the clincher when people realized the global scope of the tour and activity space and just how much greenfield opportunity still exists with it. I think that was the third time's the charm. Everybody kind of went, okay, this is real. There's some real players in the space now. There's some significant money to be made. Now is the time to kind of do it. And that seems to be the timing. Is that this is 10 years to become an overnight success.
So that was the report from July last year. Tours and activities come of age. We referenced it earlier. I mean, I'm contracted to say seminal report every time we mention it on FocusWire because, jokes aside, it is considered to be a pretty substantial body of work that really has, as you say, pushed things on a bit. I mean, but interesting. I'm going to ask Alex this because you said, Stephen, that people have seen the size of the opportunity, but and you ask somebody else, and they're saying, but it's still really bloody hard to do it, Alex, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it is incredibly hard, and I think anyone that works in this industry and has worked in the industry for more than a few months will know it is incredibly hard. I mean, if you look at the statistics of how much of the supply that's out there is actually successfully sold online, it's still microscopic.
Yeah.
And there is a large amount of work that still needs to be done to really move this market online a lot more. So this is, not, these events this week are not the, I'll call it the event and the ta-da moment and everything's great now and everything's solved. I just think that these events are actually just going to accelerate the necessary change that's required to really blow this market out of the water, if you will. I think really there's a lot more work to be done. in terms of acquiring supply. Clearly, the moves we saw this week, both from Fair Harbor and on the Boken side, are meant to get more supplies into these OTA systems. But beyond that, I still think there's just from a supplier perspective, there are a million and one other problems still to solve. So did it get a little bit more complex for a lot of the other reservation system players out there today? Maybe. However, I would say personally, as an optimist on the market, I still think there's so many problems left to solve that no one should be really shaking in their boots yet.
And we'll come to that in a second. I mean, as a journalist, we kind of watch the market, not least for things to think about, to write about, but also how these things are announced. And I wonder what happened at TripAdvisor when on Thursday the Booking Holdings buying Fair Harbor thing was announced, and they all suddenly thought, oh, damn, we were going to announce our thing this week. Or, alternatively, did they rush that deal out because there was momentum in the news agenda for what it is? I mean, I don't know if you guys have any kind of thoughts on that. It's just remarkable that there are two fairly significant deals announced within 24 hours of each other. Coincidence or design, one following the other, do you think?
I would say the latter, personally. I think that, this, you don't buy a company overnight, especially, a public company doesn't buy another company overnight. There's a large amount of legal work, a large amount of diligence that must be done. My guess is the announcement, the deal was sealed on both sides, and one was just waiting for the other. I think, deals like this, generally, people start talking about them. It's my opinion.
Yeah, Stephen?
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that. I don't think this is something that is a surprise to either of them. Certainly a surprise to the rest of us that aren't swimming in the same pond. So some say that were you on the boat with this? Where I was like, I didn't even realize there was a boat. Like, I'm swimming somewhere else. That boat's off in the distance. So clearly I missed something with this. But at the same time, I just in general, I tend not to spend too much time kind of pondering or focusing on these sorts of things outside of the business. Only because, I've got a business to run as well. So I like to think about it, but who knows, right?
Yeah.
You hear rumors in the marketplace about these sorts of things, and you go, who's going to, Bookings has been saying for years they're not going to touch tours and activities. So yeah, believe it when I see it. Well, I woke up a believer on Thursday.
Now, we've talked a lot about Booking Holdings and Fair Harbor. The deal that was announced, as we just discussed, just 24 hours later, TripAdvisor buying Icelandic company Boken, itself not that old, 3 or 4 years old. I mean, Alex first. What does that deal tell you? Because they bought Viator, a consumer-facing independent brand, back in 2014. Now it's bought a res system. What are they doing?
Well, I think it's the probably the same or directionally same approach that Booking was taking, which is, again, you want to naturally get more supply onto your platform, right? Like Viator has a very large marketplace today, or TripAdvisor Experiences. I think that's the new branding now. They have a very large catalog of experiences and tours and activities on their platform today, but they're always looking for more. And so how do you get this long tail of supply that's out there that's not using any technology to get them to easily work with you if you're a company like Viator? Well, this is a logical step to take. You're calling them to contract, right? You're calling these suppliers and say, hey, we'd like you to be on our platform. Oh, well, I don't have any reservation system, or I don't use any sort of system, is sadly still a very common answer. And so having kind of a one-stop shop, and in Boken's case, a very low-cost way to get these suppliers to sign up is a very compelling strategy to grow your marketplace.
Yeah, here's a question then. you can fight amongst yourselves as to who answers it. Why do you think they bought Viator back in 2014 and now have done this, whereas Booking Holdings has just bought a B2B player?
Well, okay, so I'll answer that one. So back in 2014, there were no B2B players that had the kind of supply that would have made sense for TripAdvisor to acquire at the time.
Right.
At the time, really the aggregators of content in the space were the larger tour resellers like Viator, Get Your Guide to a certain degree, and obviously Expedia's local expert to a lesser degree. So that their only choice in terms of aggregate content was to go with something like a Viator, and because they could buy a lot of. It wasn't true supply, but it was close enough to true supply that they could integrate with their reviews in order to make the product bookable. So as kind of a phase one, it makes sense. Now it seems like this is sort of a phase two where, okay, they've got the marketplace. Now they need the supply side to start properly feeding that marketplace with real-time availability. And they as the PhocusWire report showed, a significant number of operators that are reselling through marketplaces like Viator and Expedia are still using 48-hour cutoffs and still using email to manage their bookings with these platforms. And obviously what TripAdvisor wants to do is it wants more real-time availability, more actual availability, so they can do things like enter the in-destination market or the in-trip market. They want to be able to offer last-minute bookings and real-time confirmations, and they can't do that with email and 48-hour manual processes. So this is kind of their phase two from what I can see, and from what Dermot described in his interview with Jill, as their strategy is that, go ahead and use, if you don't have a platform, use Bokun. It's going to cost you next to nothing, and you'll get real-time availability into Viator. So it's a very compelling offer.
It's compelling, but it's also a price war, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a really key part to this. I mean, Pear Harbor's commercial model, as Stephen explained, is basically free to the supplier. Bokun's business model was not that, but as soon as the acquisition was announced, the pricing model was instantly changed. So it's going to become much more interesting now with these changed pricing models, how the rest of the market, in terms of the reservation system space, will respond.
Which obviously we have to ask that question to you then, Steve.
Yeah. Well, we haven't. Okay, so it's only been 2 days.
I'm not expecting you to unveil a 15 slides new strategy that you've dreamed up from your hot tub or something over the last 24 hours.
That's where I do all my best thinking, by the way, is in the hot tub.
But I mean, seriously, Alex raises a good point, and Alex Bainbridge is in his excellent analysis on the original deal, the Fair Harbor booking one, and he talks about, there are fewer exit opportunities right now, and the model arguably changes because of I think we are going to call it a price war from now onwards, and then you've got Fair Harbor's model, which is arguably slightly different from others. So what does it mean to the rest of you?
It means we have to really work on differentiating our products in terms of the
supply
that we offer.
Or what?
In terms of the services, the features and services that we can offer the supply community. So that may be, for some of us, it may be focusing on specific niches within the supply community in order to provide a better, more tailored solution for them, because Bokun's not going to be the system for everyone. Just like Rezgo is not the system for everyone. Just like Fair Harbor is not the system for everyone. The thing with this market is that there are so many sub verticals within the tour and activity space that have their own unique ways of doing things, that there is opportunity to specialize within sub verticals. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get the same kind of scale, but it may be enough to stay in the game. So, that's certainly something we're going to look at is, are there sub verticals that we could look at? Are there particular business business opportunities within the space that we can target that aren't being targeted by these other systems that now have much larger marketing and sales war chests than we do? There's a lot of things, right? But I mean, it's only been 2 days. I just barely changed my shorts, so you got to give me time here.
I mean, I would add to that that I think people in the hotel space had probably a very similar concern when Booking.com bought a couple of companies and turned them into Booking Suite, right? There was a lot of concern about, oh my, what will happen now? Well, in end effect, none of those competitors really went out of business or nothing really dramatically changed. I think Stephen's point is exactly right. There's always going to be extra and more value in being a specialist. And, again, with the size of the market, with the size of the number of suppliers that are out there that have today no technology, there's still so much of that I think there is plenty of room to grow still for everyone, even as they start specializing and adding more value-added services on top of what I would call the basics that are offered by some of the companies that were acquired this week.
Now, you can't look at any of this, as what's been going on over the last few days, without, I guess, looking at it through the prism of the wider OTA wars, battles, etc., that we've been witnessing for the last few years, namely Booking.com and Expedia. We haven't talked about Expedia yet. I mean, Stephen, they have local experts, depending on whichever executive at Expedia has decided to post something on LinkedIn this week. They have multi-billion-dollar aspirations for that particular part of the industry. We've got a story coming on that soon, by the way. So, it's interesting that we're having this conversation, but we haven't talked about Expedia yet and what they arguably can do. And again, through the lens, as I said, of Booking Holdings versus Expedia Group, as we're now supposed to call.
Well, I mean, let's not forget that the hotels are still the bread and butter of these OTAs. So tourism activities, as sexy and hot as they are at the moment, still generates very little revenue compared to those other business units. So it's an up and coming thing. Whether or not they invest in the same degree that when you look at valuation, it's Priceline, Expedia, and TripAdvisor are kind of in terms of order of size of valuation. So the number one and the number three have picked up their draft picks, and the number two on the list is waiting in the wings. So who knows what they decide to do. Expedia is a technology company, though, so it's an interesting proposition for them to acquire tech rather than to acquire supply necessarily, because they're already in the tourism activity space, so they already have the relationships. Whereas Booking.com or Booking Holdings rather wasn't in the space at all. So Expedia does have the benefit of already having been in this game. Priceline is / Booking has just entered the game. They've bought their way into the game. Expedia has been in the game for a while. So I don't know. There's an interesting opportunity for them to perhaps acquire technology or potentially look at building their own, because they're good at that too. So I guess time will tell. But Expedia has been very quiet on this. So
okay. So I mean,
to see what they come back with.
So on that then, Alex, why do you think Expedia has been quiet or biting its tongue over all this? Just because it's been doing its own thing, or do you think it's been getting whiff of what's been going on in the market and it's going to see how things play out, and then it may make its move? And if it makes a move, who do you think that move would be for?
I mean, I would not be surprised if there's already something in the works. I mean, obviously you can never know, but I would not be surprised if we see an announcement from Expedia in the coming weeks and months. The question of timing, as we already talked about, you wait for the first guy to make his move and then you reveal your cards. In terms of the who, there are a fair few systems out there. That being said, the investment level of some of the systems, I think, makes it a little bit more prohibitive to be the second mover. And I think or the third mover in this case. I think the key here is one thing we didn't really talk about yet, which is by buying FareHarbor, Booking.com actually took FareHarbor off the table for some of the other players as well. So it may not have entirely been an offensive move as well.
Oh, like a chess. You make it sound like a chess game. It's like a sacrifice move, right?
Well, I mean, FareHarbor's a great business that's on its own generating a ton of revenue. There's no harm in doing exactly what Booking generally does, which is buying a business and kind of just leaving it alone. Booking doesn't take the integrate with everything and mash it all together and make it all work together approach generally. They generally buy great businesses, and leave them be. Look at OpenTable. Look at Booking.com in its early days.
Yeah, these are consumer-facing companies. Every other B2B company that they've done, they've absorbed and turned it into their own gains. I'm thinking of Travel Jigsaw and Boutique and the Ninjas,
of course,
Hotel Ninjas and people like that.
But they still have the option now of entering the consumer side of the marketplace. They still don't have any broad efforts on the consumer side. They have the option of doing it on their own schedule.
Yeah.
So I think that leaves them in a much better place than maybe some of their peers.
Yeah, and they don't have to build an extranet now, right? They've got FareHarbor, so they could do a strategy like TripAdvisor and say, hey, use FareHarbor for your Booking.com channel sales or whatever the case may be. Although I doubt they would, who wants to deal with another extranet? But I mean, the point is they don't have to build tech in that case. They've already got it. So if they need to leverage it, they can. And then they can look at a consolidated distribution play on the products that are in FareHarbor. So. Yeah, it's an interesting time for sure.
Now, we can't not have this discussion without talking about what it means for the other OTAs, or specifically tourism and activity focused OTAs. It's the $170.5 million question. Look up the number on Crunchbase and you'll know what I'm talking about. But it's what does this mean for the likes of Get Your Guide, for example?
I think it makes it well. I don't know. It's tough. I mean, I'm still trying to wrap my head around why OTAs are buying Rez in the first place. I mean, that there's a perception in the marketplace that if a reservation platform is owned by an OTA, that you're married to that OTA. Are they really going to be an unbiased reservation platform that's going to let you distribute to other OTAs? Or other OTAs going to want to connect to a Rez system that's owned by a specific OTA? Because now you're opening up data sharing between OTAs, and does one OTA really want another OTA to know how much they're selling on a particular Rez platform? I mean, those are not inconsequential questions. So this may be a case where people are like, ooh, well, I don't want to touch Bokeh now because it's owned by TripAdvisor Experiences, or I don't want to use FareHarbor because Booking Holdings is a huge public company, and we've seen what huge public companies do with privacy. So maybe I don't want to share my data with a huge public company like that. So who knows? There's a lot of questions there. My feeling has always been that the OTAs should focus on being OTAs and let the Rez platforms be Rez platforms. But obviously that the rules of that game changed. So, so now it's a question of, okay, how do you deal with the consequences of what has just now happened? So Get Your Guide may need to enter the foray along with everyone else. There's a couple of very good local German Rez systems that they could purchase. Booking Kit being one. There's a couple of other ones in Europe that maybe could fit for them that they may be able to acquire at a reasonable price. or they could just sit back and be, no, we're not, we're res platform agnostic, and we will take connections from everyone. And that may be the better play for them. They may come off as being kind of the agnostic marketplace that people want to connect to as a result. So who knows? It's very early. I'm just wondering what Johannes and Tao are thinking about right now in their respective hot tubs in Berlin.
Well, let's not forget the live inventory is a really critical part of any online conversion, right? Like having a live availability and live reservation ability is a key metric. It's got to be a key metric almost across any tour and activity OTA.
Yeah.
So with that said, it makes a certain strategic sense to say, look, I can, guarantee myself, 5,000, 6,000, 7,000 suppliers online at once. That being said, like you mentioned some of the companies that might be available in Europe, there's a significant amount of funding already having gone into those companies as well. So the question is, would you rather spend X millions of dollars getting that supply instantly, or just wait for the market to mature through independent systems such as yours, Stephen, that are bringing this live availability to the market anyway? So it could be argued that the patient may actually be the ones that end up getting the same value just a little bit later on for a lot less money.
And this industry isn't known for its patience, though, is it really?
Well, I point to Stephen.
Viewpoint, Evan. I think I've been pretty patient with this market.
And arguably, Mr. Fogel has as well. I take back what I just said, I suppose, in a way. You're right, Stephen. Interesting to know what will be going through the heads of Get Your Guide, and also, all of a sudden we're talking a lot about Klook, not least because they've raised a lot of money. They're fairly late to the game, arguably. So, what does it mean for them? Do they just see what happens and hope that someone comes along and makes them an offer? People have been saying in the last couple of days, talking a lot about C-Trip.
Well, that would be
that's the third part of the that's the third part of the bizarre triangle that we now operate in globally, isn't it? You've got Expedia, C-Trip, and Booking Holdings. So we have to consider what they consider.
Yeah, and Klook is certainly a target for C-Trip in the Chinese market, because that's their primary focus is the Asian, specifically the Chinese consumer market, so on mobile. So that would be a logical play for C-Trip. Now, given that the supply is they're still an OTA, Klook is still an OTA. They're not true business-to-business supply management. So it's a little slightly different play. It's more like a specialized Viator play, but it still gives them that supply. And the Asia market is even less connected than the North American and European markets. So to go in there and expect a supply system to have live availability for a vast number of suppliers in Asia is not realistic at the moment, just because of the nature of the landscape. So C-Trip just may have to wait until there's more aggregation in real time supply, but we'll see. They may just decide to do it anyway in order to, like the Fair Harbor move, potentially to take them off the table.
Agreed. I think there's a lot of pieces that still need to move around in Asia to even get to the level that the North American European market is at in terms of connectivity and live availability. So I guess if I was in the res system world, looking east would not be a terrible idea.
No. It's a terrible idea. Don't do that.
West of Canada, anyway. We haven't talked about Google and how they all fit into all this, have we? What do you think, Steve?
Oh, yeah, we haven't talked about Google. Interesting. Google play on this. I don't see them buying a red system. I think they're the meta play, if anything. So I can definitely see them growing on the meta side with their recent, their recent sort of experiment with tours. I could see them, and that one I think was just connected to Get Your Guide and Viator.
It was.
So, with this play, it may be a case of, okay, let's accelerate our connectivity and go direct to the supply systems now that those are serious contenders. So we may see more connectivity from Google on the direct to supply rather than going through the intermediaries, which would be great for supply because the margins are better. Not so great for the OTAs, obviously, because they're getting cut out of the mix. Yeah, I think Google's going to remain on the meta side for discovery.
Yeah, I don't think there's any question
really
that they would do anything else, isn't it? I mean, it's interesting that from Google Area 120, the story we dug out a couple of weeks ago that they were doing was unbundling the products out of those OTAs, Viator and Get Your Guide. Alex, what did you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, certainly a very interesting approach to the I guess decomponentizing products. I'll call it. I don't know. I have a better word for that. I don't have a better word. I apologize, but it's what they did was from a consumer experience side. I think, and what they're doing is very interesting. Now, as we said, it's an Area 120 project, which is basically Google's own internal incubator. So to consider this as a move in the market yet, I think is even doing that is a bit early. I think that this is very much an experiment. I think what they're doing is a beautiful product, but I still think it's a very early experiment, and there's a lot more to come from there.
I was joking with one of my colleagues yesterday. I said we could probably do 3 or 4 or 5 hours on this podcast talking about this particular subject, but we're not going to, not least for her sake, but and for obviously the other listeners. But I'm going to try and wrap things up a little bit now. I mean, Stephen, for fear of you having to change your shorts more often, we don't want too many more weeks like we've just had, presumably. But just have a little think about what are the next steps are you expecting to happen at a market level now as a result of some of the things that have been happening this week and generally over this almost, dare we say, hallowed last 12 months of really ramping up of activity? What were you expecting to
I was mentioning to Alex earlier that there may be room for a GDS play, an Amadeus or a Travelport to look at acquiring technology. I think if anything, Amadeus would probably be the sort of smarter acquirer in this because they do look at res tech in a variety of different verticals. So this may be an opportunity for them to scoop up some reservation tech for tours and activities. So I think there's going to be more consolidation to come in the space. For those players that don't get acquired, I think it's going to be a challenging landscape for them. I include us in that sort of in that group because we haven't been acquired. So, as far as I'm concerned, we need to double down and sort of figure out what moves we're going to make now, how we're going to market ourselves and approach these suppliers in a different way. I think from a supplier standpoint, I have a feeling a lot of these suppliers don't know the difference. They probably haven't seen. It's not going to impact them drastically in the short term. And then in the long term, my worry with what has happened is that we're going to see less innovation in the space because there are now these very, very well-funded leaders. The leadership in the space has been kind of solidified, right? So it's who's building restaurant reservation systems now that compete with OpenTable? Not many, right? Yeah. And so once you get that kind of market leadership in the space, it discourages new companies from coming into the space because they have a very hard time getting the kind of traction that they need when they're having to compete against, a Goliath. So I think that, it's going to result in a lot of people not entering the space to maybe be creative in the ResTech kind of space because of that. I think it also then trickles down into the other supporting services that go along with reservation technology that may also subsequently get impacted by something like this. Things like photo sharing services, waiver services, resource management and rostering and employee management systems that all interact with reservation systems in one way or another. Is that now it becomes that there are fewer players, it becomes more difficult to build those relationships and to get the connectivity that they want, and to potentially compete, because if a system's already connected with the waiver system, are they really going to connect with another waiver system? I guess it depends. But right. I think it thins out the market a bit. So for me, it feels like it might have been a little bit too early. Like we just didn't have enough time to really get some really exciting tech in the space yet before the loggers came in and cut down all the trees. So I'm feeling a little bit like Fair Harbor was, don't get me wrong, Fair Harbor did a great job selling, but from a technology standpoint, were they the best tech? I don't think so. I don't think any of us really have the best tech. So my fear is that we've now kind of set a bar for tech in the space and how scalable and how attractive that tech is, not necessarily based on the quality of the tech, but on how effective the sales team has been. And don't get me wrong, they've been incredibly effective with their sales. So, I think to a degree, we've had ourselves into a tech platform, or some tech platforms that are now not going to benefit from that same kind of innovation that we've seen before.
Alex, I mean, GDS is getting in on the game, more consolidation. Pick up some other things that Stephen didn't mention.
I mean, I take actually a little bit more optimistic view for Stephen.
Alex, stop there a second. What we haven't done is ask you we haven't asked you what it means for your company, if anything.
Sure. So I think for a company that sits on top of or works with reservation systems, that's generally what we do. It's an event, but it's not as impactful as an event as it might be for Stephen's company. So from our perspective, I think it actually strengthens a business case for an independent channel manager such as the one we're building. So I think that in a lot of reservation system marketing materials, you're going to see the word independent start popping up. I don't know if it's there today, but I think that's a bet I'm willing to make. And I think there's going to be a lot of suppliers, especially on the more on the sophistication spectrum, being on the more sophisticated side, that they're going to start looking at, hey, am I with Fair Harbor or am I with Boken? And do I need to make a change here because I don't want to put all my eggs in one basket? As Stephen mentioned before, I don't want to have my data visible to maybe some of my competitors. So all these things need to be thought through in the market. And I think it's obviously way too early to say this is the exact right strategy to take going forward. But just to touch on a point Stephen made in terms of, the technological, shall we say, progress being hampered, I actually don't agree. I think one of the unique things about tours and activities is that it's not just one sector. I mean, it is one sector, but there are literally hundreds of subsectors, right? There are people that specialize in water sports, right? And there's people that specialize in booking platforms for ticketed attractions and whatnot. There's so many different varietals in our space, subsectors, that I think there's a lot of room to grow if you're specializing for one or more of those sectors. I think the systems that we're acquired today are great at being generalist, but being a specialist for especially these businesses that are just now coming online, there's always I think there's still a large opportunity to talk to them and say, look, you can go on that system, you can go on booking system, or you can go on Viator's existing system, but I really understand your business and I understand it better, and here's why. I specialize in your sector. So there's, I think, a lot more work to be done there, and I wouldn't be surprised if you see some of the systems that are out there today really start concentrating on some of these subverticals. We've seen it with some of them already out there. I would not be surprised if that continues. I mean, the word independence, I think, is one of the key things to take away from these moves today is who is actually going to remain independent, and what's the business value in remaining independent. And I think that's a question that we're just going to see.
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier. So when I mention innovation in terms of res systems, I'm really talking about the same scope as the existing res systems, right? So the general reservation platforms, the ones that are kind of the all-in-one do-it-yourself for all types of tours. As Alex mentioned, I think, and I mentioned earlier, there are many different subverticals. So I think we're either going to see we're going to see innovation in the subverticals. We're going to see niche-specific applications, but by virtue of the fact of being niche-specific, I think we're not going to see the same kind of scale that you can see from being a generalist. And so the risk there is that we're going to see less and less kind of interest from an investment standpoint, because you're just not going to get the same kind of scale in a subvertical unless you can find a really successful large subvertical that makes sense.
Well, the logical step after a bunch of specialists emerge is that someone comes and rolls them all up. So we'll be right back here again in maybe a year or two.
Yeah, you just cherry pick the leader in each subvertical and then merge them all together.
There you go.
Yep.
Right, there we go. Right, so that's a nice moment to end on, just under an hour there. So Alex is involved not least with Redeam, but also with the Arrival event, the in-destination event, as its official slogan is, which PhocusWire is a media partner for this year. It takes place September 24 to 27 in the understated city of Las Vegas in Nevada. So we'll see you there. If your program started coming together for that, Alex? Have you had to radically rip it up and start again as a result of the last couple of days?
It's actually been really exciting on that front. We've already got some of the, before this news, we've already got some of the biggest players that were involved in the events of the past week confirmed as speakers. So I think if you're at all interested in the space, it's the place to be.
Very good. Good ad. Excellent. And I have the pleasure, hopefully, of interviewing Alex's boss on stage at PhocusWire Europe 2018, which takes place in Amsterdam in about 3 weeks' time. So on stage, I'll be interviewing Kevin McLaughlin, who's, as I say, is Alex's boss, the CEO of Redeam. Luke Elzinger is the CEO of Tickets. Also, Eric Nockfar from Klook. We've talked about them a lot. And also, last but no means least, Tao Tao, who's the co-founder of Get Your Guide. So that session in Amsterdam in a couple of weeks has suddenly taken on quite a lot of significance. Again, all just in the virtue of the last 48 hours. So a little bit of news there. We're nearly sold out, I believe, on PhocusWire Europe. So make sure you get your tickets in the next couple of days or week for that. That takes place in a couple of weeks, as I said. That's it from me. A huge thank you for joining me on a Saturday afternoon, Stephen and Alex. We really appreciate it. Stephen in particular for being so honest, as you've admitted that this was quite a short changing a couple of days for you, so I couldn't think of how to verbalise that, but that's how it came out. But but as you said yourself, it's quite an interesting couple of days for your company. So very much appreciate you being so candid and honest with how this all kind of affects you and in the general marketplace, and especially to you, Alex, as always, for taking part in another pundit show. So thanks, fellas.
You're
Thank
very
you. It was
welcome.
great.
Okay, listen out for the next pundit show in a couple of weeks. Might be one in the next week, actually. We are due to do another one. This, as I said, was a hastily convened one. So, again, thanks to Stephen and Alex. And join us again on the pundit show from PhocusWire. Thanks ever so much.